Get the full Bonfire experience on your screen. YouTube.com/Bonfire Sports. Thumbs up, subscribe, you'll know when we're live. Enjoy the games.
Back by popular demand, doing the Pilgrimage podcast, currently in parts unknown in eastern Saskatchewan on our way back to Winnipeg, following a true classic in the 58th Labor Day game and 57th in Regina. Glad we got that one figured out after some discrepancy. But welcome everybody, appreciate you tuning back in. Jeff Hamilton of the Winnipeg Free Press, Ted Wyman of the Winnipeg Sun. My name is Darrin Bauming. Good to be with you. And well, we got pretty good response from the first edition of this road pod, fellas. It was a lot of fun. You know, kind of casual, just kick back, share some stories, and you know, our perspectives on the weekend.
Well, we have to keep some of the stories secret after a weekend in Regina, but you know, if we want to talk football, that's all good.
Says the guy who went to bed at 11 last night.
Well, one night. But anyway, you know, it's funny. At halftime, I absolutely said, this game is living up to its name. This is an absolute classic. It's 17-17. Bombers had been down 14-0. They came back to tie it up at 17 going into the half. And then it wasn't so much a classic in the second half, in my opinion. There's only 4 points scored in total. And it really came down to a great kick by Marc Liegghio from 55 yards out to put Winnipeg ahead, and then a great defensive play, an alert defensive play by Nick Hallett to get the interception just when the Bombers absolutely needed it. And then Winnipeg shows great, really well again that they're the kind of group that can grind out a few first downs to finish a game out. So definitely not what I would have called a classic in the second half, but as the Bombers have done so often this year, they pulled out a win when it looked like they might not.
Holy smokes, Ted's podcast. We're just here to listen, eh? I guess you took that serious. And some people said you were quiet in the last one, so you wanted to get it all out.
Well, yeah. You might accuse me of not paying attention, so I just want to show you that I did.
Okay, well there you go. You know what? No, great points. I thought, whether it's just because it's magnified because it's such a special weekend and a big weekend and a big rivalry, but there always just seems to be these moments in these Labor Day games, right? Whether it's like a massive return touchdown. Even if you look at the history, right? Winnipeg hasn't had a lot of success, but there's been a lot of close games, a lot of down to the wire, as we said all week. Throw out the records. It doesn't really matter which each team's headed in which direction at this point of the season. It's always a battle, and that's certainly what it was. I mean, I thought the Bombers were done. I mean, you looked at the momentum that the Riders had early on, and that was nuts. And then all of a sudden, you have that second quarter, and you think, okay, I was getting messages on Twitter being like, you understand this is a second half club, and I'm like, I'm thinking to myself, yeah, no, I've covered them, but it was still down to the wire, and just to have those, have a big kick like a Marc Liegghio kick. I mean, no one thought he was going to make that one. 55 yards. That was asking him to do a lot in a hostile
more than he's ever done.
And then, as we've seen in the past in this stadium, like whether it was off the crossbar, and again, I know that wasn't Labor Day Classic, but we've had all these crazy moments at Mosaic. It's an interception when they were in range to win the game. So as you said, DB, like true classic in its truest sense.
What stood out to me was how quickly Saskatchewan got in front, right? 2 scores, critical takeaway. I honestly was thinking, early second quarter, before Winnipeg was able to kind of punch a couple scores, are they going to be able to ride this momentum and just come away with a heavy victory? That was a conversation by fans and media members in the days leading up to the game was, hey, yeah, sure, Winnipeg's favored by 3.5, and maybe they're the better club overall, but you never know what's going to happen. And when it was 14-0, I was like, holy cow, Frankie Hickson, breaking tackles for 5'8", 200 pounds, like what a player. You have to put him in the conversation for most outstanding rookie this season. Titus Wall, Dalton Schoen, they'll, it's not as runaway, I think, as people think, but this is my question to you guys. This is what I really want to know. What was more impressive, Marc Liegghio's 55-yard game winner, or the weave he made to avoid a tackler and to get that punt away, which ended up, he didn't get all of it, but it turned into a pretty good net punt overall.
Well, it traveled 49 yards, so that's a pretty good punt in general, and he did it on the run after stepping aside from a couple of would-be blockers. And I mean, for sure, it looked like the Riders players probably could have just tackled him, but they went for the block, and he did a nice move. And he talked about that because earlier in the season he had a similar situation. He tried to run, he was tackled. So there you go. He's learning from these mistakes that he's made in the past, and he really seemed to have learned from his very poor performance in the game against Montreal, which ultimately cost the Bombers a win. He missed from 32 yards. It was a complete shank. It looked like he had no confidence whatsoever, and then he also missed in overtime. The Bombers, Mike O'Shea, the players, everybody seemed to spend some time really trying to pump his tires and make him know that they had his back, and that seemed to really affect him well. He's played well since, and that's a huge kick from 55 yards. I mean, it was a perfect kick. It was right down the middle.
On the road.
He just looked confident and good, and it's massive, because honestly, if he misses that kick, even though it's from 55 yards, you would say that, people aren't going to blame him too much because it's the longest kick he's ever tried in his career. But the fans here absolutely want to see a field goal kicker come through, and this time he did.
I just think it would have solidified a lot of people's beliefs that Liegghio couldn't get the job done. So now that question is wide open. Like, how reassured should people be of Marc Liegghio getting the job done when Winnipeg needs him to?
Well, should we answer that question or your first one? Because you went on again, didn't answer the actual question. I don't know.
Take it away, Jeff.
I think it's a tie. Because you need to hit that 55-yarder, or you're in a lot of trouble to win the game, obviously. But correct me if I'm wrong, but was it not 14-0 for Saskatchewan when he evaded that tackle? So you tackle him there, you turn over the ball. Maybe that is the final dagger. Maybe it's 21-0. Maybe it's 17-0, right? And it's a different game. So I thought that moment was intense. To your point, Teddy, I think it's for him to learn from that Calgary game where he just rushed and got tackled and it was just whatever, for him to be because that's what Mike O'Shea says, right? Like, it's okay to make the mistake once, but if you make the same mistake again, and it's not just Mike O'Shea saying that, it's all coaches, they want you to learn. But I thought, that was a key game. It was a key game for his trust. And let's face it, you talk about the team support, that's the DNA of this team, but let's not kid around here. There was lost trust in them. Yeah. The team, the players, it's easy to slap a guy in the back and say, live to,
we believe
fight another day, we believe in you, and it's middle of the season and it was your first loss in 10 games. You don't make kicks like that, and people are like, okay, well, now they're worried about the playoffs. Well, that, I said after that game, after that Montreal game, I said, I don't know what Marc Liegghio can do to build that trust. The car's got a mind of its own, apparently. Just boosting us to 147 to get past this car. Anyway,
don't incriminate yourself. Don't incriminate yourself.
No doubt. But anyway, so but then you look at kicks like that, and he's not getting called out to do kicks like that. Like, it was, and so he gets called out to do it. He hits it, and now that narrative changes. Now he is starting to do things that make you, okay, maybe this guy is the solution down the stretch.
I was really impressed with Zach Collaros. His numbers in the first half much better than in the second, but when they needed Collaros to make plays, he made plays. That deep shot to Nick Dembski, Dembski did a great job adjusting his body, making that kind of off-balance, over-the-head basket catch on Derek Moncrief, of all players. And then the way Collaros, it seems to almost be like by design to have a broken play or an extended play and have him roll out of the pocket. On both of those touchdowns, to Dembski and to Schoen, Collaros put it right where only his guy could get it. I don't think people truly appreciate how difficult that is to do, especially, a 50-yard shot to Dembski and one on the run, with Schoen getting his toes in out of bounds. The numbers at the end of the game were very Matt Nichols, is what I described them on the postgame show, right? Like 200-odd yards, 63%, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions. Nothing earth-shattering, but he got it done when they needed and put up points when Winnipeg really needed him the most. That was in the first half.
How many times have we seen that, DB, this year where the opposing quarterback actually has more yards, you know, and then Collaros has a fairly pedestrian yardage total, and maybe even he had a pretty pedestrian completion percentage at only 63%. But he has those 2 big touchdowns, and those are huge throws, and they're not short ones either. You know, it's plays where he really had to do something with it, and he has such trust in these receivers. He talked a lot about all 3 of those guys, or Dembski and Dalton Schoen, and he also talked a lot about Drew Wolodarski being a guy who can handle the scramble plays really well, and that works so well with a quarterback like Collaros, because they're shown how many times. Schoen has 9 touchdowns this year. I don't even know how many of them are on scramble plays, but it's got to be 50% at least. And you know,
which is now tied with Dominique Grimes.
Right, for best in the league. So I think there's your front runner for Rookie of the Year, no doubt about it. But you know, Dembski made a catch there that we were all still wowed about when we were just watching the highlights, because he made a fantastic adjustment, and the way he made the adjustment completely threw Moncrief off. Moncrief was going the other direction, right? And it, you know, I love the trust that Collaros has to make plays like that, and he's got receivers who come through for him.
Absolutely. I mean, let's go to the Nick Dembski touchdown real quick. That was an incredible catch over the shoulder. I mean, you know, we saw Nick Dembski, what was it, the Calgary game that he came back earlier in the season? He got 1 touchdown that game, but he dropped that ball early on. It was very similar in, you know, in difficulty, right? It looks like it should be easy, but the over the shoulder is like one of the toughest grabs you can make that aren't circus catches, right? You know, and so for him to reel it in, but that was the perfect pass. I mean, it was the perfect area for him to beat Moncrief, and to have that guy kind of draped on you as you walk into the end zone, like that was highlight reel. And same thing for Dalton Schoen, you know, same story. To your point, DB, like, has that window, that small window to give it to him, and it's funny because Drew Wolodarski, you know, you thought that was coming to him. But you know, Dalton Schoen, for him to be able to stay in bounds and make that play, I mean, that's perfect. That's perfect throw, but it's also perfect catch in a lot of ways. So I mean, Zach Collaros is just, you know, he's a beast, man. I mean, that's exactly what Saskatchewan needs, and we'll get into them because they're an absolute tire fire. But you know, they need a guy like that, right? Like, that's kind of what the Bombers were before. You know, they could get the job done, wins, losses, but they couldn't. You know, didn't have a guy who could make those plays that we see Zach.
Didn't they have a guy like that at one point? That guy. You know, I mean, Zach Collaros was in Saskatchewan, and he did not excel the way that he has in Winnipeg. It's there's something much more. He's much more comfortable in this offense run by Buck Pierce, and before that, Paul Appolise, than he was when he was with the Riders. You can just tell that this suits him, and he's been excellent in all of his time in Winnipeg. I mean, how many times has he even really lost? I'd say it's really quite impressive.
I think it was Stephen McAdoo as the OC of Sask at that time, but yeah, I'm not sure. Last thought I had on Nick Dembski, the catch, the throw, all of that was great, but Derek Moncrief, you know, Zach Collaros described as a special player. I loved the route that Nick Dembski ran. Moncrief is a linebacker. He can cover. He can play safety and corner because of how physically gifted he is. But he is a big-bodied guy that is essentially a weak side linebacker playing the dime. And to send Nick Dembski from that right side of the field to the far corner, like a wide side corner, to make Moncrief turn his hips and really have to run with Dembski, I thought was a great thing. A great way to get a deep shot on a defense that you know, was probably trying to defend against that. You mentioned Drew Wolodarski. Caught all 4 balls thrown his way. All of them were second down conversions. He is a lot better than people give him credit for. Just makes the catches when, again, like similar to Collaros, the numbers don't jump off the page, but clutch when they need him to be.
Classic example of a guy whose stats don't tell the whole story. Yeah. You know, he's not asked. And the crazy thing is that he might be on pace for some okay numbers. I remember looking a few weeks ago, it wasn't the case, but he's had a couple better games, like yardage wise, over the last few weeks here. But he's the guy who gets asked to do a lot of the physical stuff, a lot of the blocking, a lot of the decoys, and is told and is committed to. You talk about scrambling. I mean, there is no better scrambling receiver than Drew Wolitarsky. I mean, he comes up with massive second down catches. He always gets open. And Zach Collaros has said this time and time again, just the reliability in this guy to catch balls, and we all know what he's like, man. I mean, you talk about guys that you want to, you don't cheer for teams, but you want to see individuals that you get to know and whatever and learn about over time. Like, there is no real better guy than this guy. So he's having a career. You can make the argument he's having a career year, and he's Mr. Clutch when it comes down to it.
Well, you made all the points there, Jeff, but I would like to go and when I get home, have a look and see how many of his catches were on second down and how many of them were in the fourth quarter, because that's when he shines. And it goes back even to the Grey Cup last year when they hadn't thrown the ball to him all day, and then in the fourth quarter he caught 4 passes. I mean, the guy comes through when you really need him. And, again, you're right. When we looked at this receiving core at the start of the year, it looked kind of pedestrian. We didn't really know who was going to be the standout to make this receiving core really good. Well, Drew Wolitarsky to me has been better than I expected, and a really, really big part of this offense.
I'll send this pitch right down the plate for you guys to take a swing at any way you want. The Saskatchewan Roughriders are 6-6, and you could kind of talk about almost anything in that organization and describe something that went wrong this year. Your take on the Riders in 2022?
Just gonna need a while here.
Oh, man.
Like, it's their Grey Cup year, right? And everything is.
You want to talk about going to the buffet? Humor me right now. Absolute train wreck from top to bottom. I can't think of a single element of that team, from in the boardrooms to on the field, to coaching staff to players, that is more of a gong show than this organization. And it's just, and the crazy thing about it is because of their standing as the Saskatchewan Roughriders. There's nothing else here, right? There is nothing else here. They have, there's an obvious great Winnipeg fan base. Saskatchewan, I mean, we can make the argument they got the craziest, most rabid, most dedicated fans. And so the Riders know that. So all of this dysfunction that they have is wrapped in this incredible amount of arrogance for a team in a league that didn't even play 2 years ago in 2020. And it's not changed the way they view things since COVID knocked them out for a year and they were irrelevant. And you look at this season, DB, you look at this season and you look at the, as you mentioned, Grey Cup year. I mean, look at all the crap they've had to deal with. I mean, we could have a podcast about Duke Williams. We could have a podcast about, Garrett Marino. We could talk, about but what it comes down to, and if we want to talk about the team, it starts with Craig Dickinson. I think Craig Dickinson is actually, is in I'm in a situation. I feel he's in a situation right now where he shouldn't be the head coach. I think he should be fired. The lack of discipline on the Riders is palpable. It's embarrassing. It's pathetic. There's absolutely no leadership from the coaching staff, and that transitions, because I could talk for an hour about it, transitioning to the players. There is no leadership group on their team. No. Who's you ask the people down there, you ask the writers, you ask the people who cover this team on a daily basis, who's the leader on that team? Yeah. And at times they had mentioned it was Duke Williams. Yeah, now we can get into Duke Williams after these. We each have our rant here, but like there is, when you don't have that, you don't have a locker room that runs itself. The Winnipeg Blue Bombers have that. We all know they've had it for years. It's why they're the class of the league. It starts with the Adam Bighills, the Willie Jeffersons, the Zach Collaroses, the Pat Neufelds. You could literally go up and. That's the thing. You could name probably 15, 20 guys, and all of a sudden you're thinking, okay, that's a little bit beyond a leadership core. But that's the case there, and it's absolutely non-existent in Regina.
Yeah, it's the exact opposite in Regina. I mean, you go, and we asked our media colleagues last night when we were out having a bite after the game, who are the leaders on this team? And they had to ponder it for a while, and they came up with the name Larry Dean, who's their weak side linebacker and a veteran and a very good player. And I mean, yeah, so that... And I imagine Derek Moncrief's a guy like that as well. But it's hard to come up with those names. You could rattle off 10 guys on Winnipeg who are really good leaders, starting with Collaros. You got Stanley Bryant. You've got Nick Dembski. You've got
Jesse Briggs and Mike Miller.
Many. Adam Bighill and Willie Jefferson. And like you said, those names are all on there. But the problem to me is Craig Dickinson's inability to deal with the problems in that organization on his own team throughout this year. As far as I'm concerned, and yeah, this is an opinion coming from outside Saskatchewan for sure, they should have cut Garrett Marino the minute he intentionally injured Jeremiah Masoli and celebrated it on the field. I did not understand for 1 second how he wasn't cut before he even got to the locker room after he was kicked out of that game. It's just, they're letting the inmates run the asylum by doing that. Duke Williams comes out the next week, throws a helmet at somebody, he gets suspended. And I mean, to top it all off, not even in the lineup yesterday, Duke Williams takes an objectionable conduct penalty on the sideline and costs the Riders, who take way too many penalties. Yeah. There's no discipline going on there, and of course, we haven't even touched on it yet. Garrett Marino gets his name into the game by laying a tourist hit on Zach Collaros late in the game, and there's debate as to how that's going to be treated by the league. I just don't understand how he doesn't make an example of some people and change what's going on with the discipline on that team. And I think Craig Dickinson's run out of time at this point.
Okay, so hang on Garrett Marino, because we're
definitely... we could talk an hour about each one of those guys.
For sure, but I wanted to offer this up. So Daniela Potticelli does sideline reporting for the Riders radio broadcasts. Winnipegger, old college friend of mine, great person. She's the first female play-by-play voice in U Sports football history. She was on the sidelines, and this is what she tweeted after the game. Duke Williams' penalty incurred as an undressed player will change who the Rough Riders allow on the sidelines. Moving forward, only dressed players will be allowed on the sidelines, says Riders head coach Craig Dickinson. It's not like they anticipated that penalty to happen. But to me, that after the fact point made by Craig Dickinson is so indicative of how dysfunctional this team is. It's like they're chasing their tail. Yeah. They have no plan in place to ensure that, their quote unquote leaders are leading. Like Duke Williams is there in street clothes and sunglasses, and he's charging his team 15 yards in a tight football game. Like, it's just unbelievable. Jeff, you called it a train wreck. I don't think there's a better way to put it. It is absolutely, car after car piled up on one another, and just a huge mess of a derailment in Riderville right now, in a Grey Cup year of all years.
The context of that comment by Dickinson about Duke Williams post-game that you mentioned about Daniela, he did say, it was just a response to the thing, right? Craig Dickinson is a very nice guy, great guy. So for him to address that to me was just air, because what he said was, I guess it's not as dramatic as they're going to overhaul who they have there. He just didn't know how to answer the question or explain the actions of a player, and I think, like you said, that's indicative of what the entire season has looked like as far as accountability and control of your players. But in that time, he also said, unless that person has a meaningful coaching job. Right. So it's not like he's going to have this rule where anybody who's in civilian clothes can't be on the sideline. He's just saying the donkeys need to get out of the way if they're not going to be productive. And here's another thing. Let's get into Duke Williams, because the Saskatchewan Roughriders still have a tweet on their account about Duke Williams and saying, is there a better hype man in the CFL, as he's waving a towel, and it says, "Will wait." How embarrassing is that for them? Duke Williams, you mentioned all the, a couple different things in the selfishness. There's a guy who eye gouged Brandon Alexander during one of the games, and there was a big commotion. There's a guy who has spit on players. There's a guy who is clearly in it for himself, and it's absolutely destructive that the idea that this guy would be considered a leader on the Saskatchewan Roughriders tells you exactly why they're a 6-6 team, because they're not consistent in their approach on the field, and nearly, to the same degree they're not consistent to their approach off it.
The hit Garrett Marino put on Zach Collaros, not penalized in the game. You watch the replay, and I understand it's slowed down, but it was pretty clear to me Marino knew where the ball was. And he knew that Collaros had tossed that ball away and it was going to the other side of the field. Even in slow motion, I understand that definitely emphasizes what happens compared to real time. But it sure looked like Marino saw that ball go and then kind of loaded up his legs, and hits Zach Collaros. Hands up immediately, like, oh yeah, just incidental collision, what have you. Then the tweet after the game saying, I haven't taken a penalty since whatever, and then the sleepy Z's emoji. What more can be said about this guy? Is he making a mockery of the Canadian Football League?
I mean, he's like, when you have the reputation that he's built, when you actually made a decision to go and try to injure Jeremiah Masoli and were successful and then celebrated it, then you have your reputation is mud. And so does anyone believe that he didn't know what he was doing with Zach Collaros? Of course they don't. It wasn't incidental, and Collaros was lucky. He could have been hurt there. He could have hurt his shoulder. There's no doubt about it. He could have smacked his head. Yeah. The Bombers weren't crazy up in arms about it after the game. They were sort of trying to decide just how mad about it they were. But, I think that, I wouldn't be surprised if the league takes a look at that one. And it wasn't the worst thing I've ever seen in my life, but when it's Garrett Marino, why would you believe anything other than that he's trying to hurt somebody? Because that's kind of what he does.
I know one person who wasn't debating, how the seriousness of that hit, and that was Zach Collaros. Yeah. You can see it on his face when he got up.
Yeah, he looked
angry. Over, he saw, and let's say this, you say he could have hurt his head. I'm not trying to speculate or anything like that, but you get hit on a shoulder, you get, it's like walking into a wall. Yeah. You know what I mean? He didn't know he was blindsided, right?
Yeah.
He couldn't brace for the hit. He couldn't absorb it. It was out. He had already handed the ball off. There's no right for him to be hit there, or contacted, or touched. And then to see Garrett Marino's hands kind of go up, like as if, his hands are up, so clearly he didn't mean to hit him.
So the 340 pounds that he hit him with didn't matter.
Well, exactly. And I mean, you mentioned his tweet about not being penalized since he's returned in 2 games. Completely ignores the fact that he was fined in his very first game for the hit on that hit on Peter, on the offensive lineman on BC. Which should have been called in the game a flag, just like this one should have been called a flag. It should have been thrown a flag. So, the fact that they fined you for a play tells you that the refs missed it.
Right.
It's not that it wasn't a penalized play, but a finable play. Like, how dumb do you look? But this guy's an absolute menace. He's ridiculous. Like, he's been in the league for 14 games. Or this is his 15th game. He's been ejected twice. He's been suspended, I think, twice. He's been fined 3 times. Like, what more do you need? I mean, this guy, and then you hear about the latest reports leading into this week about how he was, visibly upset that he was quote unquote not a starter because the depth chart was in behind. Well, guess what, Marino? If you weren't a starter, you wouldn't be on this team. Guys get cut for significantly less than he has. But when it comes down to it, and I think this hit on Zach Collaros is the perfect example, among others, of course, is that this guy just can't help himself.
That's
he's
true.
One of those guys who, whether he means well or whether he's good to some teammates or whatever, when it comes to these kind of situations and exploiting vulnerable situations, he just can't help himself.
It really bothered me that when there was that discussion about Marino being upset about being listed second on the depth chart for the previous game, there comes Craig Dickinson out again and basically blames himself for it. He says it's our own communication, coaching staff's fault. Everything's fine with this guy. They just keep enabling Garrett Marino to keep being the menace that he is, as to use the word that Jeff coined. I really do not understand the team's approach to this. I haven't from the beginning, and to me, they would have been a lot better off to cut him the minute he took that action against Jeremiah Masoli.
The precise type of play Blue Bombers fans were anxious about possibly happening in the Labor Day Classic happened. And when I say Zach Collaros could have smacked his head, it was very close to actually happening. You could smack your head on the turf. Some of the worst concussions football players suffer are when they get hit onto their back and the head bounces off the turf. It was fortunate Collaros was able to get an arm down because, like you said, Jeff, it completely blindsided him. Did not see it coming. If Collaros wasn't smart to, get his arm down or able to get his arm down, however, it could have turned out a lot worse than it did. So I think, all things considered, you wake up in the morning as a Blue Bomber fan. I'm sure you're counting your blessings that, QB1 is in good shape and seemingly good to go for the Banjo Bowl. So what leads into this immediate rematch 6 days later, Saturday afternoon at a sold-out IG Field?
I forgot to mention this before we move on to this week. I forgot just before I forget with Craig Dickinson. That challenge.
Oh my God.
That challenge.
The OPI
challenge. And so we obviously, we all get the opportunity to watch. I mean, they obviously get the opportunity to watch the highlight, get the reviews, right? I mean, that's what you do. Mike O'Shea will never, unless there's a player who's adamant, and that trust is a whole different level, and I think it's a bit tougher in those situations. Mike O'Shea needs to see evidence. Coaches need to see evidence of things. So there's no doubt in my mind that someone had a computer there, was looking at an iPad or whatever, and showing them, and they would have seen the push-off, right? They would have seen the two-hand push-off. And then, so we're all thinking, what the hell? Obviously, it doesn't happen, or it doesn't get overturned. The plays stand. And then Craig Dickinson says after the game that he knew they weren't going to win, but he wanted to show support for his offense. What is going on here?
Literally, he cost this team a timeout, and they no longer had a challenge.
They no longer had a challenge.
I mean,
to show his team
support? Come on.
The only thing he showed his offense is that he's inept at making challenges.
Well, here's my prediction about Craig Dickinson. Mark Killam gets a job somewhere else, and Dave Dickinson hires his brother to be the special teams coach at Calgary. Last thing I say about him. And that's the worst part, because Craig Dickinson is a terrific human being.
He is. He is a really nice guy. He's somebody who we all like and respect, and it just doesn't seem like he's got a grasp on things this year. I think, DB, you were asking us to lead into the Banjo Bowl. I do think last year, certainly the Banjo Bowl there was some nastiness going on, and Garrett Marino was involved in it then as well. And, I do think that that's probably going to be the case. When teams play back-to-back, I do believe there's going to be some bad blood at IG Field this weekend. And in talking to Cody Fajardo before this game, he put a real importance on the Riders winning at home, because they knew they're going into Winnipeg. They got to play them twice more this month, and it's not an easy place to win. And the Bombers are playing extremely good football for the most part this season. And the Riders are what they are, what we've been talking about for all this time. I think that's a really tough loss for the Riders. And I mean, they're in a pretty good position to be a crossover team to the East, but they're not going to be able to afford a whole lot more losses. I mean, those teams in the East got to play each other, so there is going to be some teams coming up close to them at some point soon.
They're desperate. They're 6-6. They lose next week, which is very likely going to happen. It's a tough place to play, as we know. It's sold out. So all the issues that the Bombers had to deal with this week with the, not being able to communicate verbally and having to do, signals and all that stuff, all the wrinkles that you have to add to an offensive package when you play in a hostile environment is everything the Riders are going to have to deal with this week. What's to think that they're going to even come close? Yeah. I mean, this, like you said, this was, like Cody Fajardo said, this was their opportunity this past week to ideally for them, win 1 out of 3 games. You know what I mean? I mean, 2 out of 3 would have been a massive achievement against the, given what we've seen from this year. But to go down to 6-7 with a loss, you're starting to flirt with the East.
Absolutely.
And you know what I mean? Like, if you lose 2 more games to the Bombers, you start getting further and further below 500, all of a sudden 4th place is no longer a gimme.
Well, you got to have a better record than that team in the East.
Well, that exactly
to do the crossover.
You know what's funny too, though, just quickly, DB?
Yeah.
You're talking about the Riders going into Winnipeg and having trouble with the, facing that loud crowd and all the issues. That they took 2 time count violations at home.
Yeah.
When the crowd wasn't making a peep.
One of which started a series.
Yeah.
It was the first play
what the heck
series.
is going on?
Well, I don't know if you guys noticed this. I mentioned to you briefly, like when we were grabbing a bite to eat after the game. I thought Winnipeg did an exemplary job communicating on offense, and if you notice, they were doing like a hurry-up style offense late in the game. And it's almost like the Rider crowd waited until the Bombers were at the line of scrimmage. Zach Collaros was talking.
Right,
and the crowd was still quiet. And then when they get to the line of scrimmage and the center goes down, Kolinkowski grabs the football, then the crowd would swell and the volume would rise. Too late. If you're a Bomber fan and you want to affect Cody Fajardo and the Rough Riders offense in the Banjo Bowl, you got to be loud while they're in the huddle. You got to be loud while they're walking to the line of scrimmage. Winnipeg did a great job against that. Now the tables have turned, and we'll see how Saturday shakes out. We didn't mention the headshot on Greg McRae.
No, I mean it certainly looked like one. I think it was handled appropriately.
Yep.
A penalty and move on.
But a scary moment.
Those plays are obviously dangerous, and it's a defenseless receiver, and the CFL has to make sure they do things about that. I know the Rough Riders fans weren't happy about it, but they never seem to be happy about much of anything when the Riders aren't winning. So I guess that explains that. But yeah, it is important that the league watches for those things, because that looked dangerous.
And you could add the checkbox list to what the Riders suck at is in the press box and boohoo media, but they don't have the window. There's no so it's a
can't even hear the atmosphere.
Because it's a closed press box, which is kind of unheard of in a lot of ways. It's great for the November and stuff like that. Everybody has closed,
but no option to open them in the summer.
But no option to open them in the summer. And what I find is one of the key things in covering games is being able to take in that atmosphere. And I can certainly say, particularly over the last few home games for the Bombers in particular, that getting that environment has been incredible. I mean, it's been palpable. They are the loudest crowd. Yeah. For sure in the CFL.
I went to the last game and sat in the stands. I was on vacation. I just wanted to go and experience it from a different angle, and I can attest that is one heck of a atmosphere, and the fans are absolutely right into it, and it's going to be even crazier on Saturday, I'm sure.
So at 11-1, the Bombers have clinched a playoff berth, and it's early September. A lot can be said about that, but for you guys, and myself too, we know how that question is going to be answered by the players and the coaches. It doesn't matter to them that has already happened. But big picture, what does it mean for Winnipeg that they're where they are right now at 11-1? Still 2 more games against the Rough Riders, 2 more games against BC, of course, with no Nathan Rourke. We're expected to see Vernon Adams Jr. At some point. No more games against Calgary. I'm sure they're going to meet in the playoffs, but it being, September 5th today? They're 11-1 and in a playoff spot. What does that mean?
Well, it means that something crazy would have to happen for them to not host the West Final on November 13th. That's the bottom line. I mean, the Lions, to me, are the only team that can possibly catch them, and we have no idea how that team is going to look with Vernon Adams at the controls and Nathan Rourke out now. So, I mean, there's a bit of a wild card there with the Lions, and they do play the Bombers twice more, but I think the Bombers are a couple of wins away from wrapping up first place, and they're going to host the West Final again.
Well, and that's what I was going to say. To answer your question, I mean, very little, right? Or what it says is the East sucks. Right, because they didn't clinch, a spot in the West. They clinched a crossover minimum, right? Something bad would have to happen in their season significantly for them to have that situation. I mean, I believe, very often we hear players say ridiculous shit, right? Like, oh, we don't know our record. We don't know, you know what I mean? Okay. Okay.
Who are we playing
but
next
I
week?
believe them. I believe Nick Dembski when he looks at you and you ask that question, or who asked the question about the clinching the playoff berth. Maybe it was Eddie, but he said, I didn't even know that until you told me. And I believe him, because what player in the Bombers locker room doesn't think they're making the playoffs? You know what I mean? Whether it's now or later, they know that they're in a race. And I mean, clearly, as you mentioned, the BC Lions and their situation, I think they're going to be better, with Vernon Adams and say Michael O'Connor or Antonio Pipkin. And I truly believe if even if they do play crappy football, which for them, let's say would be 500 football, so they got 8 games remaining, 4 losses, 4 wins, they'd still be a 12-6 team. So, that's not going to be good enough to eclipse the Bombers for first place. So I'm with you. I think the Bombers, that's when we start asking some questions. What does it mean when they wrap up the division? And I think we know exactly what they're going to do, because they did the exact same thing last year. They're going to continue to play week in and week out. I mean, guys who have
rest some guys.
Guys who have some significant injuries or whatever, banged up, they might keep 1 or 2 guys out, but they can't sit everybody for multiple games. So, you know, I think it's going to be an interesting situation in a few weeks if and when they lock up the West, but the sea is parted for them. I mean, this is a team that's sailing essentially to first place in the West, and we could have that answer depending on how the Lions do here in the next, 2 or 3 weeks before the end of September.
As far as big picture, I think the happiest individual with the playoff clinch is Wade Miller and the business operations of the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. You know, another gate, another opportunity to sell some pops and some hot dogs and the rest. That's a huge boon to the bottom line for the Blue Bombers in 2022.
This news doesn't even guarantee them a
they
home
still have some
playoff
work
game.
to
No, but I'm just
guarantee
saying, hey, there's a lot of games left.
That news of clinching at least the second place will be the block, you know, because they'll have at least that, you know, or no, it would be second place.
But it is a huge difference maker, as you say, because when the Bombers went on the road to win the Grey Cup in 2019, it cost them a ton of money.
Yeah.
I mean,
travel.
Playing that home game makes all kinds of difference.
Oh,
So,
massive.
you know, obviously that's what they want, and I mean, the odds of them not playing a home game this year in the playoffs are pretty low.
So here we are, still in parts unknown in southeastern Saskatchewan. Looking forward to getting home, guys. I know you are too, and many others making this pilgrimage trip back east home to Manitoba. But what makes Labor Day so special? I know we touched on it on the drive out on the pod, but, you know, driving home, you know, Monday, you know, mopes or whatever you want to call it, as we head home, you know, those thoughts that go through your mind when thinking back on the weekend, the game, all of the energy and everything, of course, knowing that we're going to do this all over again at IG Field on Saturday.
Well, you know, I'll go first, Jeff, and I mean, I don't want to steal your thunder because I know you might say this, but the first couple of nights that we were there, it actually seemed pretty quiet. Like, this was a fairly tame Labor Day Classic in terms of the atmosphere outside of the stadium. It was obviously a sold-out crowd, and there was good atmosphere there. But you didn't see a ton of what we've seen in the past of Bomber and Rider fans getting together in the bars and having their great debates. There's the one place I like when we went for breakfast yesterday at that restaurant, Fresh and Sweet. That always makes me feel like the Labor Day Classic is on in there because the staff are wearing jerseys. There's blue and green jerseys in there, and they even have their little contest of which team's logo on the pancakes gets sold more. And that one always kind of makes me feel like you're really in it. And there's really nowhere else in this country where you're going to get an experience like that. It's just the games aren't important enough in most other markets. So that's what I like about it the most. The Labor Day Classic is the reason most people are in Regina on that weekend, and I think that's a lot of fun.
You know, I had said, you know, I was looking forward to this year kind of being a bit of a comeback year, more chaos, if you will, in the streets. But, you know, I talked to a few people around Regina, and as much as it was Deadville downtown, there's absolutely no doubt about it. It was not nearly what we're used to in previous years. I think that also is a testament to the city having other pockets that are more populated. I don't think it's just, you know, because I had heard there were a bunch of parties at different places, and they were busy and packed and whatever. But, you know, that's not something to dwell, you know, at right now, because it was a great weekend. I mean, it's always a fun weekend. To me, what makes it so special, because we can only really talk as scribes, right? Because, I mean, it's not like we're going down there in a tour bus with a bunch of Bomber fans and, you know, drinking mimosas at 9 a.m. and you know what I mean? And starting all day and having those funny stories with your buddies that maybe got too inebriated. I mean, I had a couple of those in my late teens. But, you know, that's not our experience, but it's damn close. You know what I mean? It's a mini Grey Cup. I mean, we work hard. We do. We work hard. They're long days, but man, we party hard. And those first couple nights and the dinners and our colleagues, I mean, we'd be remiss if we did not mention, you know, how special our colleagues are here in Saskatchewan, how close we are with them, and, you know, and them, you know, going the extra mile and joining us in everything, time. You know, every time putting dinners together, making sure that, you know, we're celebrating in real fashion, you know, a great long weekend. And it certainly lived up to all of that and more. And you know, it's you know, as much as I give this city a rough time and make funny jokes about it, I certainly love this trip. I love hanging out, you know, whether it's working or you know, having a few pops at night. And again, this weekend was certainly one to remember.
What I take away is thinking about the Grey Cup upcoming in this city. Regina is a small town, right? And, I talked about it on.
They can throw a party.
They can definitely throw a party, and I talked about it with the Schnitz on After Dark last night. The cultures in Central Canada here on the prairies are similar. Say what you want about the rivalry in the town and all of that. We're essentially the same people, and I think we have a lot of the same. We come from very similar upbringings. That all said, Regina is a small town. You go to Grey Cups in Ottawa, especially Toronto.
Whoa, Ottawa was good.
Ottawa was good.
Ottawa was good.
Hamilton was good.
They were great Grey Cups.
No, you go to Toronto.
But it's those ones that are not as centralized, right? A Regina Grey Cup this November is going to be very central. Everybody is going to be within, a small square mileage, in downtown and around Mosaic and the rest. It's going to be hard to get a hotel room, hard to get an Airbnb, all of that. But I think it's going to be a special Grey Cup. Can't imagine the riders being in it, but whomever is in that game, the energy in that city, I think, is going to be really, really strong because it's such a small market, such a small town, and really limited spots. Really good spots, but limited overall as far as how far you can venture out and get away from the action if that's what you want to do. I think that'll be really hard to do on Grey Cup during Grey Cup week. But Banjo Bowl on tap, guys. I'm excited. I think it's going to be a game full of a lot of snorting, spitting, and scratching between these two clubs.
Absolutely, and I agree with you 100% on the Grey Cup. I think it's going to be a great time. Looking forward to coming back out to Regina, and it would be a great story for all of us to cover if the Winnipeg Blue Bombers were in the Grey Cup for the third straight year. It would be something pretty historic as far as the CFL goes. So that would be really something.
Oh, it'd just be another significant chapter in the book the Bombers are writing of owning every special moment at Mosaic since it opened in 2017. Whether it was the first exhibition win, whether it was that first regular season home victory on Canada Day, no less. First playoff victory there. To be able to win the Grey Cup in that place, and it makes you wonder, would they just bus home immediately after and party in Winnipeg, or would they actually stick around and in Regina?
Paraded around town?
But there's absolutely no doubt about it. Whether it's Winnipeg, whether it's Regina, the two hotbeds in the CFL and other places too, Hamilton and some other spots obviously across the country. But it will be an awesome Grey Cup. It's going to be cold as hell. I bet that's going to be but the Grey Cup is a week earlier than usual, 2 weeks or 3 weeks earlier than last season. But they're going to put a show on. They were supposed to put the show on in 2020. Was it 2020 they're supposed to put the show on, or was that Hamilton? No, 2020.
It was Regina, yeah.
It was Regina. So they've been at this and thinking about this for a long time. And hey, maybe this is maybe it's a real opportunity for this organization to redeem itself, beginning with Wednesday night's media party and putting it on, with pulling no stops.
Yeah.
Right on, man.
It's going to be fun. Fellas, this was fun. Appreciate you hopping on Bonfire and breaking this one down. For everybody out there, we will be back at it Bonfire midweek Tuesday at 7:30. Chris Walby, the legendary one and only, joins me for the pregame show Friday live at 3 o'clock, postgame after the Banjo Bowl, after dark, as always, here on the Bonfire. See you next time.